Welcome to this daily PBJ devotional. Read 1 Samuel 27 and Ezekiel 6 today. This devotional is about 1 Samuel 27. David, however, said to himself, "One of these days now I will be swept away by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will stop searching for me all over Israel, and I will slip out of his hand." So David set out with his 600 men and went to Achish, son of Maach, the king of Gath. David and his men settled in Gath with Achish. Each man had his family with him, and David had his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, the widow of Nabal. And when Saul learned that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. Then David said to Achish, "If I have found favor in your eyes, let me be assigned a place in one of the outlying towns, so I can live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you?" That day Achish gave him Ziklag, and to this day it still belongs to the kings of Judah. And the time that David lived in Philistine territory amounted to 1 year and 4 months. Now David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. From ancient times, these people had inhabited the land extending to Shur and Egypt. Whenever David attacked a territory, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but he took the flocks and herds, the donkeys, camels, and clothing. Then he would return to Achish, who would ask him, "What have you raided today?" And David would reply, "The Negev of Judah, or the Negev of Jerahmeel, or the Negev of the Kenites." David did not leave a man or woman alive to be brought to Gath, for he said, "Otherwise they will report to us, saying, 'This is what David did.'" And this was David's custom the whole time he lived in Philistine territory. So Achish trusted David, thinking, "Since he has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel, he will be my servant forever." This is God's word. It must have been discouraging and exhausting to live like a nomad in the desert, constantly on the run from Saul. The logistics of living that way for David and his men are hard to imagine. Verse 2 told us that David had 600 men with him, and verse 3 records that each man had his family with him, and David had his 2 wives. That's verse 3 again from the NIV. So the number of people involved in David's nomadic group was at least 1,200, and probably many more, assuming that these families had children. It was a big job, I'm sure, finding food and water for these people day after day, plus a suitable place to camp when they needed to move to maintain their security. On top of the difficulty of living this way, Saul's hunt for David left Israel at risk from her enemies. Back in 1 Samuel 23, the Philistines attacked Israel while Saul was out chasing David. You can see that in chapter 23, verses 27 and 28. Maybe their timing was fortunate, or maybe they knew that Saul was preoccupied with David. But either way, Israel was not ready to defend itself, while the king and his army was out trying to kill the next man who would be king. In light of all of this, David decided, according to verse 1 here in chapter 27, to try living with the Philistines again. Remember that he had come to Achish, king of the Philistines, back in 1 Samuel 21:10. But that time he was alone. See 1 Samuel 21:1. And he was vulnerable. This time, here in 1 Samuel 27, he was traveling with a large group of fighting men and their families. Furthermore, it was now known that Saul regarded David as an enemy. You can see verse 12 for that. Maybe you've heard the secular military proverb, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Achish felt it applied in this situation. So David and his men were given asylum first in the capital city of Gath, according to verse 4, and then a more private and comfortable distance from Achish in Ziklag, according to verses 5 and 6. This move allowed these families to settle down and lead a more peaceful life, because Saul did not go looking for David in the Philistine territory, according to verse 4. What did David and his men do during this year and 4 months living in Ziklag. Verses 6 and 7 tell us the time. One thing they did was make Ziklag part of Israel, according to verse 6. This town was located in the territory God had assigned to Judah, but God's people had not obeyed the Lord and had not taken control of it yet. Now, through David's actions, they owned this peace that God had promised to them. In addition to Ziklag, David and his army invaded other nations south of the promised land that God had told Israel to conquer, namely the Geshurites, the Girasites, and the Amalekites, according to verse 8. Again, God commanded Israel to attack and extinguish these people because of their sins against him. Although David was evasive when he reported to Achish about where he was fighting, you see verse 10 for that, he and his men were doing what Israel's army was supposed to be doing. So, David and his men were at risk from their true king Saul, and for their own safety and well-being were temporarily subject to a king who did not know God. They were subordinate to ungodly, disobedient leaders. Yet they had the ability to do the will of God anyway by attacking Israel's enemies. Have you ever had a time in your life when you were accountable to an ungodly or maybe just an unwise leader, and there was little you could do about it? Maybe you're in that position now. You're married to an unbelieving spouse, you have unbelieving parents, you're trying to graduate from a school taught and run by unbelievers, or work a job under a foolish boss. What do? The answer is you do the will of God as much as possible. God's commands provided the moral compass that David and his men needed during this strange period in their lives. Let God's word point you in the direction where you should go, too. Do what is moral and right and just in God's sight, with whatever freedom you have in the situation we're talking about. Let the wisdom sayings of Proverbs help you do what will bring prosperity within the will of God in this situation. Then put your hope in God and look for deliverance from that situation. But while you wait for that deliverance, do what you can to advance God's interests and God's will. I hope this helps you today. I hope that maybe this gives you some clarity about your situation in life and what you should do. Thanks for watching this devotional or listening to it, and we'll see you next time. May God bless you. Hope you have a great day today.